Hello, everyone. By now, you have learned that it is my hope that you will be able to apply what you learn in church history to your lives and ministry today. So that's what this section is about, uh, applying what we're learning about heresies to today. So first, let's look at modern cults and movements with ties to early heresies and sects. All right, Gnosticism has many different uh, uh, representations today. The New Age movement is not something that I hear about often these days, but when I was raising my sons, the New Age movement was very popular in our culture. The idea that every person has a divine spark that we can reach out and connect to through a number of mystical patterns. Scientology and Christian Science obviously are religious movements tied to special knowledge. And Mormonism has this cosmological understanding of the afterlife that is very reminiscent of the eons that the Gnostics postulated between creation and the supreme being. Not to mention that the Mormons also have extraneous sacred writings outside of the Bible, just as the Gnostics have their Gospels. Christological heresies in the early church are still present with us today in such movements as Unitarianism, which believes there is just one God, that Jesus is not divine. Jehovah's Witnesses are the same way. They actually verbally connect themselves to Arianism, a movement we'll cover later on, which said that Jesus is not divine, although he is more than human. And finally, among the Christological heresies today is liberal Christianity. Those who claim to be Christian and yet insist that Jesus is not divine, but instead was just a great teacher. I think it's time that we learn that what often is referred to as liberal Christianity is not Christianity at all. And finally, I want to refer to Montanism and compare it to Pentecostalism and the charismatic movements today. Again, I do not consider Montanism to be a heresy because theologically their doctrine lines up with orthodoxy. It is their practice that is suspect. Their speaking in tongues, their the involvement of women in ministry puts them outside the mainstream of many fundamentalist orthodoxies. And so, even though they're not heretical, nonetheless, they're found to be outside of fundamentalist orthodoxies today, just like they were in the early church. Now, I want to call your attention to at least three skeptics who are very influential in the issue of heresy versus orthodoxy today. First of all, let me talk to you about Walter Bauer. You may be familiar with the Bauer lexicon for the Greek language. And if he had stuck to the Greek language, he would be very helpful in Christianity today. But he dabbled in early church history and wrote a book titled Orthodoxy and Heresy in Earliest Christianity. First of all, the title is a misnomer because he said nothing about New Testament Christianity, but began his discussion much later than the New Testament era. His thesis was that what we consider Orthodox Christianity was only one of many Christianities that were prevalent in the early centuries. And he would claim that none of these Christianities had priority or authority over any other. What we call Orthodoxy developed in the city of Rome, and as it gained wealth and influence, particularly after the conversion of Constantine, then that version of Christianity began to dominate the region, so that they rewrote history and declared that alternative, competitive Christianities were instead heresies. Now, Walter Bauer wrote his book in 1934, and it was largely forgotten with the advent of World War II. However, when it was translated into English in 1971, it again generated a lot of buzz, but it also generated opposition from a number of scholars who rejected his thesis, largely because he ignored the truly earliest Christianity written about in the New Testament. And many of his arguments were based upon silence, not any true evidence, but the lack of any contradiction to his thesis. And Walter Bauer probably would be largely forgotten if it were not for the work of Bauer-Ehrman. Perhaps you have heard of him. He's a very popular scholar and skeptic today. He has serious respect and expertise in the area of New Testament textual criticism. And he wrote a book The Orthodox Corruption of Scripture, which then was rewritten for a lay audience that became wildly popular, a bestseller on the New York Times book list. Ehrman, however, also branched out into other areas of church history and did not do so well scholastically, but at the same time still was quite popular. And he wrote a book called Lost Christianities, where he made popular again Bauer's thesis about alternative Christianities that were lost and forgotten with the conquest of orthodoxy. And so many scholars today, Christian scholars, refer to this thesis as the Bauer-Ehrman thesis. These two men having presented a topic that is quite palatable to the postmodern worldview that is prevalent today, that rejects classic authority and prefers no authority at all. Now, Elaine Pagels is the scholar who was selected to translate and edit the Gnostic texts discovered in the Nag Hammadi treasure. And actually, she has become what she describes as a contemporary Gnostic herself. And so she certainly would advocate that Gnosticism is equally authoritative to what we call Orthodox Christianity. So, we have a number of skeptics who are very popular on talk shows and who appeal to this postmodern worldview that is prevalent today, and we need to be aware of them, aware of their books, their writings, their teachings, and we must be able to refute them because they are having influence over people in our pews as well as people in the public square. So let me present some of Bauer-Ehrman's ideas and then offer an apologetic response in defense of the Christian faith. All right, Bauer-Ehrman would agree with Walter Bauer that heresies represent alternative Christianities. An apologetic response is that when Christianity started out, its sacred written authorities were the Hebrew Scriptures. Ehrman himself admits this, and yet Gnosticism and Marcionism denied the creation accounts and the goodness of God. Therefore, they cannot be considered any version of true Christianity. Furthermore, in the Gospel of Thomas and in Marcionism, Jesus rejected the Old Testament. However, in the Christian scriptures, Jesus remained faithful to his Jewish roots and the Hebrew scriptures. Therefore, Gnosticism and Marcionism were not alternative Christianities. Instead, they were deviant religions. Bauer-Ehrman would say that Orthodoxy, as we understand it today, won more converts, decided the church's structure, creeds, and canon, and then rewrote history. The apologetic response is that the history of Christianity was begun in the 1st century with the writings that are canonical. They are authoritative. They were preserved in the New Testament 1 to 2 to 3 centuries before the Gnostic writings appeared. And so Orthodox Christianity obviously preceded the writings of Gnosticism. Bauer-Ehrman and Elaine Pagels would claim that the Gnostic Gospels deserve a place alongside the canonical Gospels. No, the Gnostic Gospels were pseudonymous. They were penned purposefully under false names. The canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are anonymous. In none of these is the author revealed, but early church fathers assign authorship to 2 apostles, Matthew and John, and 2 associates of apostles, Mark and Luke. So we are confident of the authorship of our canonical Gospels. But at the same time, we know from their late date that the Gnostic Gospels were not penned by anyone associated with Jesus Christ. Furthermore, Gnostic Gospels were written much later than the canonical Gospels and without any connection to eyewitnesses. These are just a few of the arguments that might be put forward by Bauer-Ehrman, Elaine Pagels, and other current skeptics. These are just some suggested responses in defense of the Christian faith. But apologetics is an important discipline that will help all of us learn how to defend our faith against skepticism today. And here are some helpful resources for you. These are books that I have read and learned from. Heresies, written by Harold O.J. Brown, covers the full history of heresies from the early church until today. Alistair McGrath has written a book titled Heresy, a history of defending the truth. And then here is the Heresy of Orthodoxy, and Kirstenberger and Kruger, the authors, are the ones who coined the idea of the Bauer-Ehrman thesis, seeing the importance of Ehrman in carrying on the Bauer tradition. Now here are some books that are probably 14, 15 years old. Reinventing Jesus and Dethroning Jesus. These books were written specifically to counteract Ehrman's book, Misquoting Jesus, and they still are helpful today. Other apologists who write in defense of the faith are listed here: Paul Copan, William Lane Craig, Craig Evans, Gary Habermas, Craig Keener, Mike Licona. I've already mentioned Alistair McGrath, also Ben Witherington and N.T. Wright. All of these apologists have spoken at New Orleans Seminary at one time or another as part of our development of the apologetic discipline among our students. Well, the next question that we will address is, which came first, orthodoxy or heresy? So I will leave you with this question with the hopes that you will ponder it before we come back together and proceed through our series of studies on heresy and orthodoxy in the early church. All right, thank you again for your attention.